Welcome to the Happy Mindset, episode 133. Today's episode is called Why Write. Today I'm just going to talk about why I write regularly, why I wrote my first book, why I enjoy writing, because it's something that's been on my mind for a long time when it comes to writing. Because when I was growing up, I didn't really aspire to be a writer, like a best-selling author, or maybe I've heard people before as well, like wanting to be J.K. Rowling and having a franchise like that to do with their writing. That's never massively resonated with me. I do want to put out books that are successful in the world, but it's not fundamentally why I write in the first place. I've been writing for years now, and I don't have any success as a writer, but I still enjoy writing it, and that's why it's been on my mind for a long while. Why do I still write and continue to write and continue to do it in spite of it just being a hobby and not getting paid for it or not having a massive amount of success in writing? So I'm just going to share some insights today around why I write, just to give you a different perspective on this thing. Because again, I don't even see myself as a writer type. I don't feel like I fit in with writing groups too much. I don't feel like I don't like the pretentious vibe as well that you get from some people when it comes to writing and reading, or if they're well read and they can come across pretty pretentious, but you kind of get that in any field you're in. I get the same vibe in coding as well. When you've got people who are like really good at coding, they can be pretentious if they want to, and I just don't like those people in general. And so when I think about writing, I don't feel like I belong in like a writing group or anything either. It's not something that I really aspire to do either, to be honest. I think about writing more in the sense of self-mastery. I think about it more in the sense of psychology and deeply exploring your mind. I'm going to point out some stuff today on a practical level that will help you to understand this. It's not as esoteric as you might think it is when we start talking about deeply exploring the mind. So that there again, I guess. Yeah, I don't really cling to groups, I guess. I am more drawn to the people, and the people that will vibe with me are the people who are doing it for more of a self-mastery reason, that they're interested in a skill set. And you'll find these in all areas of life. You'll find them as yoga teachers, you'll find them as writers, as coders, anybody who's like dedicated to their craft. There's a level of self-mastery there that goes into it, and generally over time, if you're on that path, you'll find people like that rather than a group identity. So when it comes to the psychology of this, so writing, two ways I would broadly categorize it is there's a journaling aspect to this. A journaling aspect can be a stream of thought, stream of consciousness. It can also be intentionally even slowing down and connecting emotionally what you're saying in a journal, because with the journaling part, it's quite a private thing, I find, because anything can really come out there, and it's going to be really specific to your private life. So you're going to be writing out stuff like that you mightn't necessarily want in the public arena. It mightn't be ready for the public consumption. Because I guess it's like, if I think about it in terms of coding, think about it, I don't know how much you know about coding, but there's like GitHub. So you've got private repositories and you've got public repositories. You pay a little bit more to have a private repository on GitHub. The public ones are free. So with writing, when you're putting a book out there or you're putting blog posts out there, you're accepting that this is in the public domain. But you can also have a private repo, which would be your journal. And that's something that you can keep private. And then when you put something public, in coding as well, what you'll find is that there's certain things that you hide before you put it public. There could be a key, there's be some key, a private key in your code that you want to actually hide before you put it public, which you can do by creating another file, putting that into the file and not pushing the file public. So there's overlap there actually between coding and writing. And that's the balance that you kind of strike over time. When it comes to writing, you know what you want to keep private and what you are willing to put public, because the balancing act here is that you're not going to hide everything private. There's an intelligence you just get as a writer with self-mastery, that you're like, I'm going to put this out here because I know that there's other people from observing the world. This is a big thing with writing. It's observation. If you ever look at the great writers throughout time, they're observers, even comedians as well. The ones that are really good, they observe society really well, and they can break it down into something that we can relate to. So observation is a key thing in writing, and so that is what will help you as you become a better writer. It'll help you to put things out there that you know will resonate with people because you see it in your observations of the world around you. Starting off, that's quite a difficult thing to do when you're not a writer or when you're not dedicating yourself to self-mastery, because I think there's always an element of vulnerability to it, but you're at your most vulnerable at the very start when you don't have a baseline or reference to putting work out there and seeing whether it resonates or not. At the start, you're kind of like a blank slate. You're really in your own head. You don't have a good grasp of society, where that's at and where other people are at and what they'll resonate with. You haven't got that feedback yet, so I think you're at your most vulnerable at the start of writing. But that's kind of the thing that happens anyway. If you're going to be a blogger, or if you're going to be somebody who writes books, that's the sort of things that you're going to learn over time. With writing, you could also just be doing it privately in a journal if you want to. It's completely up to yourself whether you feel drawn to putting something in the public or not, in the public domain. So when it comes to the psychology of this, to exploring the mind, the practical benefits that you have of being a writer in your day-to-day life is that you're more intentional with the words you use. As you gain experience in this over a few years, you'll tend to babble less, blab on about things and go off in tangents all the time. I guess podcasting kind of helps me with that too, that I need to stick to the point more on a podcast. I can't have a lot of meanderings too much or wanderings of my own mind. Sometimes I'll engage in it a little bit, but I try and keep things concise and to the point. I'm not going to repeat a sentence over and over and over again. What you'll find in the real world is you'll find people like that, and they don't even know they're doing it because they don't have a practice in place where they're aware of this stuff going on. Because it can be quite annoying actually being around somebody who repeats themselves over and over and over again, and they never change that habit. And I don't think it's a good experience for that person either, because if the thing is, I guess the way I kind of look at it is that you're getting an insight into somebody's mind when they're speaking to you, how coherent they are, how much they're rambling, how much they're repeating themselves all the time. You get an insight into kind of the self-awareness there, and as well just a slight insight into the quality of the mind itself. Like if somebody's blabbing and repeating themselves, same thing over and over again. I suppose this is where the compassion and empathy comes in, because I realize how difficult this is, working through all this stuff. And then when you see somebody like that, you're kind of like, Jesus, it must be tough living in a mind. It's not a condescending way. It's really like an empathy way where you're like, Jesus, it must actually be quite tough. This, I guess, is where you're learning the balance between sympathy and empathy. I'm not being sympathetic here because I could give them some insights into something that might help for them if they're looking for that. So there's a fine line here where you don't go on the side of sympathy, because that can drag you into that experience, really validating that experience. What you want to have is just empathy there to realize, Jesus, it must actually be kind of tough. When you're feeling annoyed by this person, you can go, Jesus, it must actually be tough to be living with that if I'm hearing this and it's kind of annoying me. But writing anyway can help you to stop overthinking. And it's a great outlet as well for helping you to make some of the big choices, the decisions in your life. And even when things happen, like for example, COVID happening now, the pandemic, it can help you sort through things that were completely out of your control. How do you navigate your life with that, realizing that not all the things in your life are within your control? So how do you deal with that and face that? So that's an overthinking part. It'll help you to refine your thinking. Thinking as well, the other part here, the point I'm going to move on to now, is the suppressed emotions. When I think about emotion and thought, it comes up quite a bit in my podcast. They're like two sides of the same coin, but I wouldn't tend to think about it too much. When it comes to emotion, a lot of the breakthroughs in my life have come from feeling into suppressed emotions. For whatever reason, it gives you an insight. It allows you to think in a way you normally wouldn't think, because I think within those suppressed emotions, there's a perspective of life that you've suppressed in some way and you don't have access to in your day-to-day life. You're not looking at the world through that lens. So when you can manage to feel into suppressed emotions that you've had for years. For example here, growing up, I would have saw myself as a good boy archetype. That was something, it was like a coping mechanism that I had. It kept me safe. But as an adult, that doesn't really serve me at all, because that good boy archetype can stop me from speaking about things that I need to speak about and conversations I need to be having to be healthy, to be like a healthy self-actualized adult. So that coping mechanism have to start working through that, and you work through that by working through suppressed emotions. So with the writing, a good outlet here is that you can begin writing about a topic that you've never talked about in your real life. It could be any area. It could be sex, it could be relationships, it could be anything where you just haven't had really healthy or productive conversations and you've shied away from it. You've never really spoken properly, or whenever the conversation comes up, you feel like your body kind of freezes and you feel like a rabbit in the headlights. Journaling is a great outlet for that. And it's going to be difficult again at the beginning, because it's something that you probably won't have the words to begin with. All you'll have is this kind of stuck feeling. And that's probably where writer's block can come into it. It's the filtering yourself too much. So journaling is just writing stuff down, writing down the gibberish there. This ties back to my last point, is that when you start journaling and you start seeing all the gibberish that's there when you write stuff out in an unfiltered way, you start seeing how that connects to the person who just babbles, and you can see that they're not doing this work where they're seeing this more objectively, where it's like, geez, there's a lot of rubbish in my brain. There's a lot of stuff that's just random, and there's no distance there until you start the journaling process. And so pick a topic that you felt very restricted in. Just think back to how you were as a child as well. How did you look at the world? How were you looking at it in a way that kept you safe? What were you identifying with that kept you safe? Like for me, Derek, for example, it was this kind of good boy archetype that was in the back of my mind. It wasn't something that I consciously wanted in my mind. And for a long time as an adult, I was like, I hate this feeling. I just want to get rid of it. I didn't know how to get rid of it. And I gradually started to realize it was actually through journaling around the stuff that I felt rigid about. That's been helping. It starts to loosen stuff. And it changes your perspective. It changes your thinking. And that's how you can grow from that. So that's the suppressed emotions. There's a lot of work there. That's a continuous process, but it is a great tool to have, because otherwise you could be living your whole life in these kind of bubbles where you're like, I don't really even like my life like this. I don't like feeling rigid about certain topics. I don't like that I can't actually express myself in a healthy way. Because it is something you learn over time. At the start, you're going to be awkward with these conversations, and you mightn't say the right thing. That's normal and natural. That's something that will evolve over time if you stick with it. It's a difficult process, so I'm not going to say it's easy. Even feeling into suppressed emotions, I've often found that it's hard to breathe into them. It's actually, it feels very kind of, it's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like there's a tightness in my chest, and I'm having to actually really breathe in properly. I think a lot of it actually tied into, I've been chest breathing I've been a shallow breather for a lot of my life, breathing primarily from the chest. It's been in the last while, as I've been working through some physical problems with my jaw, that I've been made more aware of the breathing aspect of things, breathing through my nose more, breathing into my diaphragm more. That's helped a lot, to be honest. Yeah, it's just more, feel a bit more free in my body, free in the breath there. So, but that's not easy at all. I'm just gonna say that takes a lot of patience, time, dedication, commitment to self-mastery. Now, this actually ties into it. The next point I want to make: self-discipline. Writing is a great medium, a tool for self-discipline. Again, find your element. It could be yoga, could be coding, could be writing. Find that one thing that you have to dedicate yourself to, that you have to commit yourself to. Because when I get up in the morning and I do my journal, sometimes I don't really want to do it. I've kind of got into the flow right now, where I'm like, I kind of like it because I've got my flow going. Before, when I thought about journaling, I used to just write it out, stream of consciousness, and I didn't really like that too much. Now I'm slowing down a bit more and attaching what I'm writing to the emotion, actually feeling it, and really just kind of slowing down. when you start seeing the effects in your day to day, it'll also give you the incentive to write more. When you start to see that, geez, I'm thinking a bit more clearly, I'm speaking a bit more coherently than I usually would. When you start seeing that in your day to day, there's just a natural buy-in over time that you're like, geez, writing does psychologically improve my life. So why wouldn't I keep doing it? Because I remember how tough my life was when I had psychological turmoil. And I guess that's where I would have the empathy for the person I mentioned at the start who could be blabbing on. Because I was that person as well. I can remember what it felt like to be really confused about the world and to be blabbing on about things and not realizing I was doing it. So that's the key to empathy, to realize that you're probably at that stage in your life as well at some stage. And then the last thing I want to touch on is deep thinking. This is another thing that I've been plagued by for years until I found the outlet of writing regularly. Even this podcast as well, any kind of creative outlet for me kind of fills the gap here. When I was growing up, I didn't really have an outlet for deep thinking. I used to think I was a weird oddball for wanting to think deeply about the world. And when I say think deeply about the world, I'm talking about what's the meaning of life, those types of thoughts. I always was curious about that, but I'd never found a medium, or I'd never found people who could help me to think about these things in a healthy way. Not a nihilistic way or an analytical way where it would drive me mad, but in a way where I could just be introspective and question these things in a creative way, in a productive outlet. Like, that's where this podcast comes from, and that's where my book comes from. It's from asking the deeper questions about life. Happiness even, that's a deep question to ask if you ask it properly. And so writing gives me that medium for deep thinking, and it actually helps me to think less. So this is a thing that I often find with people, is that when I'm in conversations with people as well, sometimes they'll have this kind of feeling that, geez, you must be always thinking about this stuff. Which was true before, when I didn't have an outlet for my creativity or for my deep thinking, that drive I had within me. It became very malfunctional because I just no proper outlet for it. So it was just in the background. I wasn't really asking stuff, but it was destructive. It was in the shadow sides. But what I found is that as I've brought this out into the open through writing and through podcasting, it's expressed. It's no longer internally within me causing turmoil. It's something I'm expressing outwards. So when I have that, like I do a podcast every week, I do about 3 blog posts every week. When I have that outlet, it keeps me ticking over. So it's actually healthy because I'm putting these thoughts and I'm putting these stuff out there. So there's a sense of peace that comes with that. They're no longer bothering me because I can see I'm actively working on this. I'm actively expressing this. I'm actively creating from this. And that gives me a level of peace where I'm not dwelling on it then. If I wasn't expressing this stuff, I would dwell on it. And that's where the problems would come in psychologically for me. I'd be reverting back to that person who was babbling on about stuff, who was bothered by things, but wasn't able to actually express that or articulate that. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think there's a lot of people probably like that in society. And I think that'll draw you to other coping mechanisms. So I'll just give you my experience about that today. Deep thinking is actually a gift. It's not a bad thing. It's just learning to cultivate it in a healthy way, in a productive way, in a creative way, in a way that helps the people think about things. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's my Why Write podcast for today. I'm going to do another one on why code and why podcast. And that'll end out the year for us this year. So as always, if you want to check out my work, go to thehappymindset.com. You'll find my book there, Taking My Life Back, which is also in audiobook format right now as well. And my blog, Medium, is there. And if you want to support the podcast, click on the coffee icon and you can donate to the podcast. So that's it. Thanks again for listening, and I will speak to you on the next episode.